Imagine you wake up in Kuala Lumpur and notice that fuel prices at the petrol station haven't changed much in the past year, despite fluctuations in global oil prices. Then you head to your favorite coffee shop, noticing the price for nasi lemak has stayed surprisingly consistent, and your monthly electric bill isn't skyrocketing. On the surface, it feels like Malaysia is shielded from sharp cost of living spikes that often plague other countries. One major reason behind this relative stability is government subsidies. Subsidies, particularly for fuel, electricity, and certain food items, have been a cornerstone of Malaysian economic policy for decades. Here's a graph with data that we got from the Ministry of Finance, Malaysia, on subsidies, incentives and assistance from 2009 to 2024. As you can see, in every single year, the government of Malaysia has provided subsidies after subsidies, and in the most recent years, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Malaysian government provided substantial subsidies to cushion the economic impact of the pandemic. As a matter of fact, from 2020 to 2022, over 203 billion Malaysian ringgit was spent just for this cause. The government had provided and directed cash assistance to individuals and businesses that were affected by the lockdown and saw reduced economic activities. Furthermore, the government also provided one-off programs such as electricity bill rebates, wage subsidy, and subsidies for public transportation. But as you can see, as Malaysia transitioned out of this pandemic, the subsidies became less and less. But it is still much more significant, with the latest year available for 2024 showing that it is still much more than 2019 levels. These subsidies, which stretch even before this data, have always helped everyday Malaysians. They have stabilized prices and eased financial pressures. But there's just one problem with subsidies. It is the fact that they pose long-term challenges. On the government side, the biggest question is always, how do we keep supporting these subsidies without compromising the country's fiscal health and economic growth? Or put it simply, how can the government afford to continue subsidies without going broke or piling on more national debt? Yes, subsidies are not free. They come at a cost. After all, subsidies are, at its simplest, financial aid or support extended by the government to make certain goods or services more affordable. In Malaysia, subsidies can be direct payments, price controls, or tax exemptions. The main reason is to ease the cost of living and ensure basic needs, like food and energy, remain accessible to the public, especially low and middle-income groups. These policies have been deeply woven into the Malaysian socio-economic fabric for a long time, reflecting the country's commitment to social welfare. However, subsidies are not free money. The funds for these subsidies must come from somewhere. Typically, governments either reallocate tax revenue, borrow, or reshuffle their budget to cover these costs. When prices rise worldwide, for instance during an oil shock, the cost of subsidies escalates. This can create a heavy burden on national coffers. To put this into perspective, here's a graph on the federal government budget for 2025 as published by the Ministry of Finance, Malaysia. Here on the left side of the graph is Malaysia's revenues. It is how they collect money. As you can see, it comes from various sources, ranging from income taxes, non-tax revenues, government assets, and so on. This money would then be used on the right graph, which is the government's expenditure. As you can see, one of these is our topic for today's video, subsidies and social assistance. For the 2025 budget, Malaysia's government is expected to spend 421 billion ringgit, and a massive 12.5% of which will go directly into this subsidies category. 12.5% is no small amount. For reference, only 9.5% goes to the economic category under the development expenditure. These economic categories are used for things like infrastructure development, industrial growth, and long-term projects that aim to strengthen Malaysia's economy. This essentially means that Malaysia is investing less into their long-term projects and more into short-term benefits like subsidies. Thus, as you can see, subsidies aren't free. They are expensive. Not only are they using a portion of people's taxes, but Malaysia is also missing out on funding important development projects because they need to give out subsidies. But just what are these subsidies? Well, there have been various subsidies implemented by the Malaysian government for years. One of the most well-known subsidies in Malaysia's history is fuel prices. The government has a long tradition of subsidizing fuel prices to help ease transportation costs for its citizens. Petrol, especially RON 95, and diesel are often sold at government-regulated prices below global market levels. This keeps transportation and logistics costs low, benefiting not just personal vehicle owners but also businesses that rely on road transport. Here's a graph on Malaysia's petrol prices. As you can see, petrol prices, especially for the RON 95 and diesel, have been very consistent. They have rarely changed, and if they do change, it takes years for the prices to change. This is the exact opposite of many economies out there, where fuel prices change every single day. And that's the role subsidies play in Malaysia's petrol prices. It is the fact that the government provides billions of subsidies to ensure that the petrol prices stay consistent. Here's a comparative table to show you just how low Malaysia's petrol prices are in ringgit. Data published in October of 2024. As you can see, Malaysia has the lowest RON 95 petrol prices when compared to countries like Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, and even Saudi Arabia, which highlights just how much fuel subsidies Malaysians get. Now, the reason why Malaysia can do this is because they have a historical role as an oil and gas producer, which helped fund these subsidies. When global oil prices were stable or relatively low, it was easier for the government to absorb the difference between retail prices and market prices. However, whenever global oil prices soared, like in the early 2000s, or during the commodity price spikes in 2022, the cost of maintaining artificially low fuel prices rose dramatically. But this, like many other subsidies out there, comes with benefits and drawbacks. The biggest benefits with subsidies, however, are mostly only seen in the short term. In the short term, fuel subsidies help maintain price stability and keep inflation in check. Retail prices for RON 95 are capped, offering Malaysians relief at the pump. This also curtails a domino effect where higher transport costs could push up food prices, consumer goods, and services across the board. But in the long term, these subsidies can distort the true cost of fuel, reduce incentive to adopt energy-efficient technologies, and impose a significant burden on the national budget. The annual money spent on fuel subsidies might otherwise be allocated toward infrastructure, education, or healthcare. Moreover, artificially cheap fuel can lead to overconsumption, exacerbating traffic congestion and environmental pollution. Let's put this into a better perspective. According to the Fiscal Outlook for 2025 published in the Ministry of Finance in page 173, the report indicated that the current system of subsidies and social assistance, particularly consumption-based subsidies, was stated to be prone to inefficiencies and misuse. The paper published in the Ministry of Finance website said that one of the examples here is subsidized diesel consumption. They saw the subsidized diesel consumption skyrocket by over 80%, rising from 6.1 billion litres in 2019 to 10.8 billion litres in 2023, despite much smaller increase in diesel vehicle registrations during the same period. This suggests potential leakages in the subsidy system. What this basically means is that the subsidies meant to support genuine needs may not be reaching their intended beneficiaries. Instead, they are being exploited, leading to wastage of valuable public resources. For example, the surge in diesel consumption without a proportional increase in diesel vehicle registrations indicates that subsidized fuel may be diverted for unintended purposes, such as smuggling or misuse. This issue is further highlighted by the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Cost of Living, KPDN, which reported a sharp rise in cases of smuggling and misuse of controlled goods. 1,853 cases in 2023 compared to 1,196 in 2022. Such leakages undermine the effectiveness of subsidy programs and divert funds that could otherwise be used for more targeted and impactful social assistance initiatives. Now, it's not just fuel subsidies that the government is subsidizing. There's so much more, ranging from electricity subsidies to food subsidies. And each of these subsidies have a reason behind them. These subsidies are important, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which may have caused thousands of people to go bankrupt had it not been for these subsidies. The most important reason that we see behind subsidies is the fact that they are a form of social safety net. By keeping essential goods affordable, the government helps reduce the financial strain on lower-income households, ensuring they can meet basic needs. However, while subsidies have significant benefits, it does not mean we should just ignore the cost that they bring to the economy. And that's what we want to talk about the most, the real cost behind all these subsidies. One of the biggest drawbacks of subsidies to Malaysia is no other than fiscal deficits and public debt. Over the past few years, we have seen Malaysia's national debt as a percentage of GDP to rise. You can already see that from this graph right here, where back in 2019, the general government gross debt as a percentage of GDP of Malaysia was just 57.1%. But by 2021, as Malaysia's economy slowed and as subsidies were being given out, the percentage of debt to GDP rose to over 69.2%. Here's a graph with data that we got from the Ministry of Finance, Malaysia, on their 2021 list of programs and allocation under the schedule to the COVID-19 Act. This is basically a detailed breakdown of the programs and allocations implemented to support Malaysians during the COVID-19 pandemic. As you can see, this is no small figure. 16.8 billion ringgit went to wage subsidies, job retention and worker hiring incentives. Some money went into small-scale projects, while others to electricity bill discounts. But collectively, they make up 5.3% in the total expenditure for that year, with another 5.8% from subsidies and social assistance, according to the 2021 federal government budget. These funds are then amongst the causes for the increases of Malaysia's debt. But, as we continuously mention throughout the video, there are benefits and drawbacks, and whilst the drawbacks might be big, the benefits would arguably outweigh the drawbacks caused by the pandemics. Now, another drawback is the reduced capacity for development expenditure. We showed that graph earlier, but let's take the 2022 budget on this one, as it involved a lot of subsidies for that year. As you can see in the graph right here, out of the 332 billion ringgit involved in expenditure for that year, a massive 6.9% went into the COVID-19 fund, whereas 5.2% went into subsidies and social assistance. This is over 12.1% of the entire budget of 332 billion, which is approximately 40 billion ringgit, allocated solely for subsidies and the COVID-19 fund. The economic category has also seen a spending of 12.1% for that year, which is also approximately 40 billion ringgit. To put it simply, nearly the same amount was spent on economic development as on subsidies and COVID-19 relief. While subsidies and assistance were essential to support citizens during challenging times, this allocation highlights a big trade-off. The funds used for immediate relief could have been invested in long-term development projects. Thus, what the government needs to do isn't to give out subsidies, but rather to reduce it, as well as give it to only those who really need it the most. This is what Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim has done in recent times. He has advocated for targeted subsidies. As a matter of fact, in the middle of 2025, the fuel subsidies for RON95 will be targeting 85% of the population, leaving out the 15% who are ultra-wealthy users. Anwar, in a speech, even said that foreign nationals and the top 15% of the ultra-wealthy users were enjoying over 40% of the RON95 petrol subsidy, and he plans to fix that next year. So, this is a good start, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.